actually is, although it's though you never would have thought this perhaps earlier, is understanding planning. And we've got Paul Davidson from the Kintore Community Council speaking on how the planning process fails communities, or does it?
How we can change it.
Well, hopefully we will change the narrative. Martin Ford, who's a councillor in Aberdeenshire, planning is a blood sport with full audience participation. There's definitely a theme here, guys. And Claire Simmons, planningdemocracy.org, on the planning and democracy. So that's who's speaking tonight. I just would like to draw your attention to the fact that Climate Week Northeast is starting very, very soon. It's only, what, 9 days now? So it starts on Friday the 12th of March and runs for 10 days, the 21st of March. There is a climate treasure hunt that we're encouraging people to do. So if you're interested in running a treasure hunt during or within your kind of local area, then MDEC in Aberdeen are running a facilitation briefing tomorrow, 4:30 to 6:30. And that'll basically tell you everything you need to know. You don't have to go to that to get all the resources, but it is a good idea. I'm just drawing attention to some of the events because there's loads of them. So basically, mapping Scotland's past is a good one to go to, because what we're asking people every single day of Climate Week is to have a mindful walk and to map your path, and also to put up your experiences onto our social media. We also, an ACA event is how to plan your community green space, whether that be a woodland or a garden or something like that. And that's on Saturday the 13th of March, 2 to 4. And another ACA forest themed event is the work and vision behind our forest. That's Tuesday the 16th of March at 7 till 9. All the details, including the most amazing brochure done by volunteers, is available at climateweeknortheast.org. So if you have a look at that, you'll get the full rundown of events. There are some that have had to be changed or cancelled, the very few that are face-to-face, but have a look on a webpage to get more detail about that. And most of them are on Eventbrite too. There are other events as well, not just Climate Week, because the Transition Network is doing a What's Next Summit between the 3rd and the 20th of March. That starts tomorrow. You can sign up, and there's loads of different events about where we are now, what we want to do, and what our future should be. So that's a really interesting festival as well. There's also a climate emergency co-creating local action plans event. SCAN is running on Tuesday the 30th of March, which might be of interest to people. And our next climate cafe is on the 6th of April, so next month, and we're taking part in Dolphin Fest. So it's all about marine energy, marine seabirds, and marine mammals. Okay, so that's it from other events. You can catch up on the ACA website, the Climate Week Northeast website, our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, or YouTube here. And this recording will go onto YouTube as well. So that's over and out for me now. I'll pass you on to our very first speaker. So without further ado, Paul, do you want to take it away?
Yes, hopefully you can all see my screen now, and in a minute I shall start the show. Okay, the reason that the first part of this title happens is it's obviously because planning law is written and passed by politicians. And my proposal for the second part is to have better informed and more active community councils. There are 100 community councils in Aberdeen City and Shire. That's a lot of community representation. And all of them should be doing more to represent community views in planning decisions, because these affect our communities. Community councils are volunteers, not employees just doing their daily work. And they see their local areas as real places inhabited by real people, whereas developers and council planners see squares on a map and a means of either filling planning quotas or generating profits, respectively. Community councils are the only community group with a statutory role in the planning system. Having this statutory status as a consultant gives community councils much more clout than individual citizens. It is a fact that Parliament, the government, and the local council set up the planning framework. Developers make the major applications, but communities are on the receiving end. Developers act, communities can only react. But how effective can an individual citizen be in arguing against a planning application that would damage his community? The way the planning process works means that his views and arguments either fail to get made and therefore registered in the system, aren't given the importance they should because they don't use the right language that planners use, and the decision makers, in this case, the case officers and the county councillors on the area committees, can generally find reasons to dismiss their arguments. So I'd like to point out a couple of examples where the planning system is unfair to the public. Notification. You get notification in the post from the council if there is a planning application made within 20 metres of the boundary of your property. This is fine if the application is for your neighbour's kitchen extension, but not much use if the developer wants to build an industrial estate in the next field but one to you. You either have to read the local paper that the council choose to advertise in, which for people in Kintore happens to be the Ellen Times and the Inverurie Advertiser, which are weekly papers that don't sell a lot of copies in Kintore, or be proactive and search for it on the council's web planning website. Each week, local authorities are required by law to send a list of planning applications to the community councils in their area. It's then up to the secretary to do something with it. Some community councils provide a service of posting important planning applications on their Facebook pages. However, the planning laws are correcting this by, for major developments, requiring a more rigorous pre-application consultation process. Here, developers are required to have a public exhibition of their plans in the local area, where there's opportunity for the community to make comments and have them put on record in a pre-application report. Having this event warns you that something's coming, but it might be a few years before an actual planning application is submitted. Very large developments also need to have development frameworks or master plans approved by the area committee before the developer can apply for planning permission in principle. And even though you can't officially comment on frameworks and master plans, anybody who checks the published agenda of the area committee will have a few days to email comments to his local councillors of any reason to object. The key thing is, get involved early, do your research, don't leave it to the last minute to prepare objections, and keep going with the objections. And this is important because once the planning application is posted, there could only be 21 days to submit a comment or an objection. Although for major objections, the case officer usually allows a little more time. This is your one chance to put your views on record as an individual. And if the developer changes his plans after this time, which is his prerogative, and something that the council or any of the consultative bodies might persuade him to do anyway, you cannot comment on the changes. By the way, community councils and all the other consultants only get 14 days to make an initial response, but they can flag up that the response is conditional and they might want to respond to any changes or additional developments. Another problem is that Aberdeenshire Council and possibly Aberdeen City Council too delete all but the most basic information contained on the planning website for the application after 5 years. So the tip is download all the information you might need in the future. And the other example is the well-known one that developers are able to appeal to the government to get a local decision, a local refusal decision overturned. But community bodies don't have the right of appeal against a planning decision that has been approved. The only recourse then is to ask for a judicial review of the decision, which, unless you have £70,000 in your back pocket, isn't a practical court of action. I should point out that Aberdeenshire Council and Aberdeen City Council are scrupulous in following planning laws and the planning process to the letter. The imbalances are inbuilt into the Town and Country Planning Act and the supporting regulations. However, the Planning Service has discretion on how they make decisions in some areas. One of these is conditions of approval. Now, these are usually drafted by the planning case officer, often with the guidance from the specialist consultative bodies, Natural Heritage Officers, Scottish Water, and they may actually consider requirements of Scottish planning policies and the planning framework. Conditions are specific requirements, like widen the access road to the development and build a roundabout to improve access, or retain all the trees in a specific part of the development. The public don't get to comment on the conditions. Where the decision is delegated to the Planning Service, the conditions are published only when the Planning Service issues the approval notice. Where the decision is made by the councillors at an area commission meeting, the Planning Service report setting out the required condition is published a few days before the committee meeting. So you do have time to email the local councillors. One other source of infirmance is what's called a Section 42 application. If the developer doesn't like the conditions of approval, he can then make a further planning application called in Scotland a Section 42 application to have the condition removed. And if he's successful, the council can take the opportunity to remove or rewrite every condition of approval, not just the one that the developer has applied to be removed. The public can object to the removal of the specific condition, but if they don't know, they cannot object to the other changes because we don't know until the approval notice is issued. And of course, after the initial approval has been issued, the public cannot apply for the condition to be toughened up or more conditions added. And that brings us to enforcement. The issues here are the Planning Service never appear to have enough resources to enforce every condition of every planning approval. And in many cases, they do rely on the public to climb on the developer and point out breaches to the enforcement officers. There's also a 4-year limit. So if a breach of a condition has been unnoticed for 4 years, then the council can't enforce it. And this is why the public in Inverurie didn't get the A96 underpass that was a requirement of approval of a big housing estate. They just ran out of time to enforce it. However, even more concerning is that the enforcement is discretionary. The council can choose to take action against the developer who breaches a condition, or they choose not to. If they can't think of a reason for allowing the breach to go uncorrected or punished, they say it's not in the public interest to require enforcement. And there's nothing that the public can do about it. So we've covered actually 2 of the 3 local authority planning functions. And we should talk about the most difficult one, which is development planning. And as far as we're concerned, citizens, the bit of development planning that affects us most is the local development plan. The main area where communities can work to prevent planning blight affecting their communities is to try and influence what goes into the local development plan. And the heart of the LDP is a list of preferred development sites in each settlement. And the LDP has a key role in determining how communities will be affected by planned major developments. And this, what I put on the screen, is the killer statement. The determination, unless materials considerations indicate otherwise, is to be made in accordance with the plan. So I think that means must. And hands up if anybody disagrees with me, but that means if it's in the development plan, it's going to take a hell of a lot of effort to get it stopped. And it's also seemingly impossible that once a development is accepted and becomes part of the local development plan, even if it's not implemented in the 5-year period, it never seems to get removed from the plan. So this is the process that we have at present for how everybody's local development plan is developed. It's a top-down regime by necessity, and it applies government policy and regional targets for economic growth, housing, and the top-down drivers are the targets and the national outcomes set by the Scottish government, which include grow the economy, reduce greenhouse gas emissions to zero, protect and enhance the environment, make business thrive, and so on. And there's even one for communities, make communities inclusive, empowered, resilient, and safe. And all you climate change people know that these contribute, some of these contribute to some of the 17 UN sustainability goals. And this, there are 11 national outcomes if you want to look them up. We used to have 16, but we've lost 5 on the way. And this feeds down to 2 key documents, the National Planning Framework and the Scottish Planning Policy. And these represent the vision of the Scottish Government's vision of how Scottish land should be used to further their targets and incomes. The current National Planning Framework, which has set the last LDPs and the ones to be issued this year, are from NP3 from 2014, which has been translated into the 2014 Strategic Development Plan for the Grampian region. It says, Aberdeen and the hinterland would be well placed to take advantage of the continued exploitation of North Sea oil and gas reserves. And this dictated planning for a large expansion of business and housing in the area. Peterhead would become a centre for carbon capture and storage technology, and Aberdeen a centre for renewable technology, forming an energetica corridor, and will all benefit from improved conference facilities. Well, this hasn't happened as predicted, but we have had a massive increase in housing. The current Scottish planning policy has 238 paragraphs which state government policy on how nationally important land use planning matters should be addressed across the country. The main ones being sustainability and placemaking, and you can read the rest of some of the key ones. You can see what I mean about having to understand the language of planning. I don't think anybody actually knows what placemaking means, but you can, if you ask, is this a sustainable development? That will make you look like an expert planner. Councils can choose how much of the Scottish planning policies to use in their LDPs. It's not obligatory to use all of them. Aberdeenshire policies and the supplementary guidance in the LDP do state some important protections for the environment and the expected quality of the development. However, alongside the noble intent, there's often a get-out clause. An interpretation of the policies depends on the judgment and discretion of the planning officers. So it's often worth looking to find a particular Scottish planning policy with a clearer, stronger message if it supports your objection. This is the one of the key bits here, how people can comment and try and influence the content of the LDP. This is what we've got at present. There's some talk at the moment about the plans being developer-led rather than plan-led. The developers are involved at quite an early stage because they identify the sites that they'd like to develop and submit these to the council. And the public consultation is mainly on the council's assessment of those bids and main issues report. And it goes through to a proposed plan which the councillors propose, and there is another chance to comment, but by that time it's already been drafted. So I'm not sure how effective that second round of consultation is. Several local community councils have suggested that community councils should be involved in the actual process of making LDPs, not just commenting on completed reports, working alongside the local authority planners to turn quotas and policies into workable plans that would benefit the local communities, rather than just being able to comment at a later stage. Drawing up LDPs involves filling quotas for development and requires the intimate participation of developers at the very early stage. As the LDP plans are high level and set out in abstract, not realistic concrete terms, the general public tend not to get involved. And if they do, being able to comment on what are essentially conceptual developments, find that their comments can easily be brushed aside. So when the LDP schemes are eventually turned into real planning applications, the public engage then, but the planning steamroller with the assumption that LDP plans will be implemented fully means that their objections fail to meet the criteria for going against something in the LDP. This year, the government are in the process of introducing an NPF4, which will have a big effect on the next round of LDPs. This has a lot of good stuff from the previous NPVs, good intentions, zero greenhouse emissions, better greener places, and so on. But there's also, because of the Planning Act and the major consultation period, there's got a lot of ideas, a lot of changes coming. We don't know exactly what, but it will mean a big change for the LDP. One of the most important parts of which will be the NFP will become part of every LDP in the country. The Scottish planning policy will be incorporated into the national planning framework. And the function of the regional strategic development plan will be replaced by non-statutory regional partnerships, whatever they are. We don't know if this will make much of a difference in practice, but there seems to be a lot of disadvantages compared to now. On the plus side, new planning legislation includes local place plans. These are to be developed by community bodies to be an input to the local development plan. Hopefully we'll get more details of what's involved in this process when regulations are published and guidance are published by the government, and that will clarify the position of how local place plans can influence or change the LDP to benefit the community. But some community councils have already taken the initiative of writing the vision statement, which is found at the beginning of every settlement statement in the LDP, and that's a good thing. We need more of them. We need more participation of community councils at that level. The one big issue that I have and other people have with LDPs is housing. It's a contentious housing issue throughout Scotland, and building houses on greenfield sites it's causing disruption all over Scotland and England. And there's been a lot of discussion in the MP4 review about how valid the local and the national housing targets are. I've put this quote up, which is from one of the reviews, and it says there's an absence of robust methodology. I think that's good criticism. More putting that another way, that's another way of putting it. The so-called housing demand is a big driver in forcing through housing developments. Every council seems to have a shortage compared to the housing target. And that could be because housing demand is actually market driven. The developers want to sell 4-bedroom mansions rather than the affordable housing, which is the actual community need. Developers can buy greenfield agricultural land cheaply and sell houses competitively, making the profit on the factor of 8 or factor of 10 in the value of land with planning permission for housing compared to that for agricultural land. All we can do is object where we don't think houses have a suitable standard or are unnecessary. So try either one of the previous two quotes about housing or this one here, which says we shouldn't compromise the ability to deliver high quality design. Even if there's a shortfall in the housing targets, it has to be a good development of the right time and the right place. That's what Scottish planning policy and planning framework require.
Well, I'm just going to give you, oh good, you're back, you're getting the final
Right. So, okay, so final thoughts. Market development, not in the public interest, not necessarily in the public interest. It's your local environment. You know more about it than outsiders. Protect it. And how can we influence, how can the public influence the outcome of the planning process? Learn from the developers. Engage early, learn the rules, be alert for applications, make your case strongly and consistently. Learn the language, policies, material objections, place making even. And if you don't know, ask. The planning service are helpful to people asking silly questions. Important thing is to give the planners a reason to refuse a particular application. This has to be in the right language on planning terms. And if you haven't got time for this, use your community council. And don't forget, community councils have a unique role as a statutory planning consultee. And finally, remember that the purpose of planning is to manage the development use of land in the long-term public interest. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. That was very interesting. There's so much to take in. Now